Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Small Business, Big Wellbeing, How SMEs Can Prioritise Employee Wellbeing and Create a Positive Culture. I'm Ellie, I'm the HR Advisor at Westfield Health. Thank you all for attending this morning. Today we're joined by Shevaun Haviland. If you'd like to just give a bit of an introduction.
Hi, good morning. Great to see you all. My name is Shevaun Haviland. I'm the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. For those of you who don't know us, we represent the 53 chambers, British chambers across the UK and 79 international chambers across the world. In the UK, our chambers have about 80,000 business members that represent 6 million employees. Great to see you.
Thanks. We're also joined by Alex Lucas.
Hello all, good morning. Lovely to see you all here today. So I work for an organisation called UK Active, and UK Active is the not-for-profit health and membership organisation for the fitness and leisure sector. So we represent around 4,000 members, public, private and independent fitness and leisure sector studios and gyms across the UK. And we work with our members and a variety of different partners within our sector and outside of the sector, with government and across business, to really support our mission of making more people more active more often and supporting, I suppose, the growth of the nation through supporting the health of the nation.
Thank you. And then also joined by Vicky Walker.
Hi everybody, good morning. It's Vicky of People for Westfield Health. So looking after corporate health and wellbeing across 4 countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany and the UK.
Thank you. So before we get stuck into the conversation today, just a little bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a recording shortly afterwards by email. You've joined in listen only mode, so if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box and we'll try to answer as many as we can. You'll see our latest research report in the download section called The Big Opportunity for SMEs. And during the webinar, we'll be asking some poll questions to include audience members' experiences. The polls are completely anonymous and optional, but we'll share their overall results. It's an interesting way to learn from your peers as well. At the end of the webinar, a survey will appear on your screens, and it would be great if you could give your feedback, as we use this feedback when developing future webinars. So what we'll cover today. Today we'll be discussing a range of topics, including insights on the challenges that SMEs are currently facing, why employee wellbeing is so important in smaller organisations, tips and low-cost wellbeing ideas for organisations to adopt. We'll look at research findings and tips on how to support employees to be active during their working day, and finally, how to measure the impact of employee wellbeing initiatives. So to set the scene, here are some of the stats from our Culture of Wellbeing survey that we did in June 2022. It found that 64% of employees would leave their job if the culture didn't fit, and that 86% of employees say they were more productive at work if there was a good culture. Earlier this month, we also conducted research where we asked over 2,000 UK employees about their perception of small and large businesses in terms of wellbeing, workplace benefits and culture. This survey revealed that a third of SMEs don't have an allocated wellbeing budget when it comes to delivering employee benefits. The SMEs report also stated that cost and time as their biggest challenges when it comes to delivering. 48% of employees think great culture is a key benefit of working for an SME. And finally, research from the British Chambers of Commerce showed that in order to retain staff, 65% of firms said they'd increase salaries, while 61% said they'd use flexible working arrangements and 38% use employee wellbeing programs or benefits. So if we can get into the conversation today, Shevaun, what are the challenges that SMEs are currently facing?
Thanks, Ellie. So our members really, represent the UK economy, in that we have probably 80% or so who are SMEs, but a good number of very large businesses and some very small. And I'm sure many of our audience today will know that small and medium-sized businesses are facing an unprecedented amount of pressure and costs in their business. you know, coming out of COVID last year, you know, we really expected to see a strong uptick, and there have just been a series of issues along the way. So 4 key broad areas. The first, absolutely number one issue that businesses are facing is inflation. So 65% of firms in our quarterly economic survey for Q2, and we're just seeing Q3 results coming out this week, say they expect to increase their prices. I mean, to be honest with you, we probably see about a 20% inflation on input costs and only 10% inflation on output costs. So businesses are really having to absorb a significant amount of that in their margin. Businesses up until probably Christmas were citing labour as the main issue in terms of getting people for their business, but of course energy costs are now absolutely the key issue. And the real worrying numbers are that about a third of very small firms were saying that they might actually have to downsize as a result of their costs that they're facing. The other 3 issues are particularly global supply chain disruptions. So exporters are saying the cost of international trade has gone up significantly. Brexit has also meant, of course, that where you were shipping to Europe, you are now fully an exporter, and about 70% of exporters are saying they are finding the TCA rules for Europe very difficult to adopt. And some are seeing that actually they are moving activity out of the EU into other markets. And then, as I said, skill shortages are such an issue for firms. Even if you want to expand, it's really hard to find people. More than 3/4 of firms in Q2 were saying they were having difficulties recruiting. And smaller firms, it impacts them even more significantly because they're often losing staff to bigger firms in the area. So a lot of issues faced for our members.
And how are business leaders feeling? What kind of support are they looking for?
So the great thing about being a member of the Chamber, of course, is that you have a selection of other business leaders you can talk to about what they're doing to help grow their business and look after their staff. Businesses are people. You know, our staff is the most important thing to our members, to us all and to our members. So businesses are really looking at ways they can support their people, cost of living payments, wage increases, flexible working. They really recognise this period of intense anxiety, and our chambers are helping find resources and sources for their business members to support their staff. As you said earlier, you know, well-being is a crucial way to retain our staff. 65% of our members said that they were increasing salaries, 60% said they're using flexible working arrangements, and nearly 40% are using well-being programs. So we really see our businesses trying to help support their people.
Thank you. So we're going to run our first anonymous poll now, which is what challenges are you facing as an organisation? So we've provided the options of skill shortages, stretched resource / nobody responsible for wellbeing, restrained budgets, unable to engage with employees, or other or none. And if it's other, feel free to comment in the chat what that might be. Okay, so I can see we've got the results in now. We've got 35% of you saying that's skill shortages, with the second highest being restrained budgets at 28%. 21% of you saying stretched resource / nobody is responsible for wellbeing, with 10% saying unable to engage with employees, and then other saying none / other. So I'm not sure what our panellists think about that, but one of the other options we've got someone in the audience saying they're struggling to get people back in the office as well. And lots of comments also about attracting staff who are prepared to work in an office.
Yeah, I think the way we attract our talent now has absolutely changed. And I think COVID has forced that around flexible working, and now employees' expectations of what they want from an employer.
Definitely, thank you. So Vicky, as we know, the current climate is a worrying time for everyone. So why should companies invest in employee wellbeing?
I think, you know, when we think about how to attract talent and what our employees want, I think we all assume that it'd be pay that would come out on top. But it's really interesting that wellbeing and flexible working, as just seen on our poll there, is really important to people and just as important as pay. And I think the expectation shift, it's no longer a nice thing to do. I think hopefully other people will echo and feel this, that when you're going out to recruit and you're interviewing people, talking to people about having a wellbeing strategy is expected rather than something nice to do. And it's gone past the you know, free fruit on a Friday. It's absolutely so much more than that. I think what the pandemic has done, it's allowed people to pause and reflect around really what's important to them in their lives. And people have felt vulnerable and have felt scared around their well-being. And I think now it's around they've reevaluated what's important, and they've expected the employer to do the same around looking after their well-being whilst at work as well. So I think it's given people that pause in life and sort of reevaluate what is important to them. So I think now, you know, companies have got an expectation to invest in employee wellbeing, and it's not to do it to stand out in the market anymore. It's absolutely what employees are wanting.
Thank you. And Shevaun, it's no surprise that SMEs have less resources than larger organisations, but how can they prioritise and incorporate wellbeing?
Yeah, it's good question. So what we see organisations doing are several different things. I think designating a wellbeing champion or a small working group seems to work quite well. Actually, as the BCC, we are also an SME, and we have a great, we call them the social committee, but really they're the wellbeing committee. So that's been really successful. And actually, the great thing about being a smaller organisation is you can be more agile, you can be more nimble, we have less policies. You know, we should take advantage of that to put things in place and test and try them.
Okay, so moving on now to our next poll, which is, do you currently have any employee wellbeing initiatives in place, and do you feel like they are supporting your employees? So yes, and please comment in the chat which initiatives you have. Some, but we do need more, or no, we don't have any wellbeing initiatives in place. Okay, so we've got the answers through. So 32% of you saying yes. I can see that we've got a number of wellbeing champions that have had mental health first aid training. It seems to be a really good resource that employees utilise the champions. And then we've got 53% of you saying some, but we do need more. And then only 15% saying no, we don't have any wellbeing initiatives in place. So quite interesting results. Vicky, what are the most impactful but low-cost wellbeing initiatives that organisations can adopt?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting on the poll that people want to do more, and I think sometimes we overcomplicate what a wellbeing initiative needs to be or what a wellbeing strategy is. You know, it sounds really fancy, but actually keeping it really simple is really important. I found with engagement of things. So before you do anything, before you go out and spend your hard earned money that you've begged for around wellbeing, don't go and spend it until you've established what it is your colleagues want. I wouldn't make assumptions. So really take the time to speak to your colleagues, engage with them, whether it's, you know, just talking as you're wandering around your offices or on Teams. just informal conversations, maybe have, if you've got champions or employee voice groups, get them to collate some information, do town hall sessions. So really try informally, try and get as much feedback around what it is they want to see before you embark on something you think they want and they absolutely don't want to. As I said, really start by keeping it simple. And start small to show that you're doing something. It's okay saying, oh, we're going to have this amazing wellbeing strategy, and it's all talk and no action. So I think colleagues really want to see action. So really start small to show that you're doing something and that you're listening. And it could be as simple as saying, we've heard you, this is what you want, and this is how we're going to go about it. And don't overpromise is what I'd say. It could be something simple like a one-off webinar. If it's we're talking about cost of living crisis, and Shevaun's talked about impact on colleagues around that. So it could be a financial wellbeing webinar or something first. Maybe it could be that you then say once a week, one of your meetings is going to be a walking meeting. Get hold of the old-fashioned telephone call, get people off a screen. Stop using Teams and Zoom all the time. Maybe, pick up the phone. It could be putting in a meeting, but actually tell people we're just going to chat. We're just going to talk about what's on Netflix. We're just going to talk about stuff rather than business. So giving people the time to down tools a little bit is really important around wellbeing. There's no point putting tons of wellbeing things on if people haven't got the capacity in their day to be able to attend. If you said, oh, come along to a resilience workshop, and actually they've got so much work they can't. So sometimes it's about making sure that the workload allows them the time to invest in their wellbeing as well. Maybe think about how you can be flexible around times, working times if you can. I know not everybody can, but working times, start and finish times. Thinking about, banning emails on a Friday afternoon or meetings on a Friday afternoon if you can. I think there's a couple of things I would say watch out with wellbeing is your managers are colleagues too. So how are you looking after your managers, and whilst expecting them to look after everybody else? So think about how you can support your managers, is the specific things that you can put on for your managers as well. And in relation to that, behaviour breeds behaviour. So if it can't be led right from the top, if it is just spoken about and not delivered in actions, then people will find it very contradictory. So think about how you lead this from the top. Have you got a senior stakeholder in your organisation that can really help with this? So I think that's important around sort of being seen to invest in your own well-being when you're managing a team, rather than it just being talk about it really. So yeah, hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, we've had a couple of audience members writing what their initiatives are. We've got some people offering paid wellbeing breaks, and others who run a monthly Wellness Wednesday session where they take an hour or two out of their day to do an activity to benefit health and wellbeing, which just sound really great.
Yeah, I mean, they sound really great, and I think if you can get your colleagues to lead on some of this stuff. I know we had a colleague in my team that she would get us all dancing. I mean, we used to laugh, but it actually got us moving, and it was at the start of a meeting or at the end, and we'd pick our favourite songs, so you're a little bit more engaged in it and you're all feeling daft together. But it made you laugh. It kind of just lightened the mood a little bit, and it got you moving. So yeah, those endorphins really help. I think it's really key to find out what matters to your employees. So the easiest way to do that, and the simplest thing, is talk. I know it sounds really simplistic, and I don't want to belittle it, but talking is the best thing that you can do around wellbeing anyway. So talking about wellbeing and what matters to them, they will just love the fact that you haven't taken that 5 minutes to have that conversation around what matters to them.
Thank you. So Alex, please could you tell us about the UK Active and Sport England consultation on workplace physical activity opportunities and support for SMEs?
Absolutely. So this particular piece of research, obviously it's focused specifically on physical activity in the workplace, but actually it's been really interesting, hearing what's been said from Vicky and Shevaun, because well, it feeds into a wider part of well-being, of course, and some of the findings are very similar. So this research consultation we did in partnership with Sport England, with support from the Federation of Small Businesses and the Confederation of British Industry as well. And it was a mixed methods approach. So we combined kind of focus groups, surveys and interviews with individuals from SMEs, so employees and employers, as well as individuals working across health, sport, fitness and leisure sectors. And one of the key findings that came out of the SMEs that we surveyed was that 44.4% of them do not currently provide opportunities for employees to be active. So specifically, that's looking at active opportunities. But we did look specifically at the types of opportunities and supports that were in place, or that SMEs were likely to put in place. And as you can kind of see from the slide here, some of the more popular opportunities tended to be ones that have kind of low cost associated to them and are more easy to implement. So some of the popular opportunities in place were things like the Cycle to Work scheme or physical activity challenges that might be able to be done through an app. Or it could be as simple as a step or a walking challenge. Most frequent supports were things like flexible working, which was obviously mentioned in some of the findings you talked about at the beginning there, Ellie, as well as encouragement and support from colleagues and role modelling from managers. And on the flip side, the least popular kind of opportunities and supports were the ones that incurred more cost, especially like a fixed cost up front, such as a gym membership or providing physical activity equipment, health and wellbeing allowances, or maybe access to physical activity through employee benefits platforms. So we're already seeing here, I suppose, this is linking in with what's already been said, that kind of the things that might be better to support the wellbeing, and in this case it's physical activity for smaller organizations, obviously very different from those for larger organizations, and part of that does come to the point of resource and cost as well. And one of the key areas that we wanted this research to do was to kind of pull out some tangible tips and recommendations for employers of smaller organizations of what they could do to start to support their own staff to be active. So I've just got 6 here that I'd like to run through. And the top one there is give employees time to be active. So I guess that plays back into the flexible working that we've already heard quite a lot about. And these tips here are based on what was found from our sample size to work really well in organisations. And that time to be active, individuals knowing that they're allowed to take time to use their working day to move or to take time for their well-being was really important. But likewise, similar to what Vicky has mentioned, it wasn't just enough to have senior leaders or management saying, yes, you can take the time to be active or look after your well-being. Actually, the role modelling is really important too. So it's actually the physical seeing that managers are adopting these sorts of behaviours themselves. It's really kind of empowering for the staff. Keeping ideas simple and social were really some of the opportunities that were the most popular and the most successful, I suppose you could say. And I think there can be a tendency sometimes we think we've got to spend all of our budget or put all of these new ideas in place, when actually the ones that were really simple, the ones that brought employees together, and I guess that's an incentive of moving, it's that socializing aspect, that's the one that really kind of were the ones that were sustained over time. And likewise, that co-creation with employees as well. So again, I suppose you could put any number of opportunities in place, but if they're not necessarily meeting the needs of your employees, then they won't be used. And that's sort of what our research indicated here as well from the physical perspective. And employees really do appreciate being involved in that process and talking and understanding what it is that they want and need, and developing those opportunities with them, co-creating with them is really valuable. Actually, similar to what Shevaun was saying, UK Active is also an SME themselves, and we have something called the Staff Council, and we organise social events, and we're sort of the go-between between the executive team and the staff. So we're there to kind of listen to what people want and accordingly try and develop kind of events and activities that work for them. So really, if it was just us trying to do it without the feedback of our team, I don't think we would have events that people wanted to go to, so it is really valuable. And I can't understate the last two as well, especially the one around removing existing barriers before implementing new ideas. So again, I think, you know, there might be a tendency to jump right in and think, right, we need to put new ideas in place to support well-being. But actually, if there's a number of barriers that are preventing people from moving or taking time for their well-being already, then putting new opportunities in place doesn't mean that they will necessarily make things easier for staff. So I guess a nice example from the physical activity perspective is kind of a work setup that encourages incidental movement. That could be at home or that could be in the office. Perhaps the barriers that people don't really move much because their work setup doesn't really allow them. So is there something that could be done to change that work setup so people move further to go to the bins or to go get some water? Kind of things like that. And then the last one about understanding opportunities available in your local area. And I suppose this plays more into the working from home, especially maybe for organisations that are much smaller, like your micro businesses. There are quite a lot of opportunities out there that, say, the fitness and leisure sector can support on in terms of supporting SMEs. But the problem at the moment is that I don't think anyone knows what is available, or there's kind of less information flow about that. So that's definitely something that I think needs to be kind of improved from both sides, but just taking a look at what is available in your local area, kind of reaching out and asking questions, that is a great place to start as well.
Thanks, Alex. And just a question from the audience. If we can't offer flexible hours, what physical activities can you suggest for people to do during their lunch breaks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this will vary from, you know, person to person. There might be some people who would love to go out for a run or a cycle during their lunch break. But if that's not necessarily something that individuals want to do, it could be a kind of a way of joining people together to maybe go on a walk together. That could be in a virtual setting. So perhaps it's like a walking conversation. One thing that we found works really well in our organisation is actually walking meetings. So that's maybe not necessarily in the lunch break, but it's if it's a meeting that doesn't necessarily require you to be on your computer, perhaps it's just a one-to-one and you're going to be working remotely anyway. Could you take that outside and spend that kind of 20-30 minutes perhaps doing a little bit of a walk around the block? So I think simple things like that. It could even be going to grab your coffee, but instead of doing it in your house or going to the kitchen in the office building, perhaps it's a 5-minute walk away. So it's your journey there and your journey back is building in just that additional movement that you might not otherwise have had.
Lovely, thank you. And Vicky, how can organisations measure the impact of their wellbeing initiatives and ensure they're being utilised?
Oh, we love to measure everything, don't we? So yeah, I think sometimes we feel we have to justify what we're doing and if it's working or not. But I think there's loads of ways to measure the impact, albeit look at your employee engagement and satisfaction. How happy are your employees? So they'll tell you, and don't be afraid to get it wrong. So don't be afraid that if you put on a webinar and there's only 2 or 3 people attend, don't be that sign to give up. So it could be that it's just not the right thing at the right time. So don't use that as don't use that as an excuse to give up around wellbeing. I think employee engagement around people attending things, how satisfied their people are, again, talking to people, asking people how they are. You can look at the traditional statistics around, absence, turnover. So you can look at the more traditional stuff as well and try and use it to measure there. But I think more importantly, we talk a lot about happy colleagues, happy businesses. So the more happier and engaged your workforce is, the better performance your business will have. So yeah, I think talk to your colleagues, ask them if they're happy with what they're engaging in, and monitor levels around that in terms of satisfaction. So yeah, I think there's lots of different ways, as well as the more traditional stuff around, staff absence and presenteeism and things.
Yeah, I would agree with what Vicky's saying on that in terms of measurement. and forums where people can feel like they can talk about what is important to them. And so I think you need different types. A lot of organisations will hold monthly all team meetings, for example, where you can do breakout groups and get feedback that way. People might not always be really comfortable to say how they feel in those forums, so also doing it through line management, you know, and building up from the bottom through teams feeding up through line management, I think would work in terms of measuring both what people feel at the beginning and then how they are enjoying the different, or how different things that you're putting in place work or don't work.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something there as well. I think sort of to what Vicky, well, and Shevaun was saying about the conversations, would never underestimate the value of that, well, we call it from a research perspective, qualitative data capture. I think it can be easy when we talk about kind of measuring impact and collecting data, that you think of the large scale surveys that and those large scale metrics like absenteeism and presenteeism, which might be much harder for some individuals if they've got a very small business, and instead that value of just listening and hearing what people have to say through conversation can provide just as much valuable feedback as any sort of like quantitative metric can. So they both have their value there. So don't necessarily be put off if you've got a smaller organization, you think I can't collect those kind of large scale metrics. That doesn't necessarily matter. It doesn't mean you can't collect information in general.
I think, you know, just to wrap that up, it's so important, isn't it, to listen as well. So talk to people, but really listen to what they're saying and taking that time to not pretend that you're listening, but really listen and echo what you're hearing back to your colleagues as well, in terms of conversation and in terms of action as well. So yeah, that's really important.
Thank you. And Shevaun, how can SMEs develop and support a wellbeing culture?
I mean, we all agree that a good employee mental health and well-being is absolutely crucial to running, you know, a successful and sustainable business. So it's important that employers provide good working conditions and ensure that work-life balance is in place. And of course, most SMEs don't have HR departments, so it comes down to the leadership. And obviously sometimes, you know, we find that difficult. We find those conversations we've been talking about difficult to have. And, you know, there are lots of different things that can be put in place, both active and not necessarily so. I saw an interesting idea in a big organisation for, you know, that bit when you come in the morning and you're feeling a bit terrible and you've had a really bad morning and someone says, "Hi, how are you?" And you say, "I'm fine." You know, because when you talk to people, they often say, "I'm fine," when you're not fine. And in our team, we put in place this thing where actually we just use marks out of 10. So if you really were feeling terrible and you wanted to talk about it, you would just say, "I'm a 2." And then somebody would know to say, "Oh, let's go to the kitchen, grab a coffee. Why are you a 2?" You know, and actually it was a really nice way of indicating how you actually really felt, as opposed to feeling like you should say you're fine all the time when you're actually not. I really liked some of those ideas. Some of them obviously more corporate, like offering people an extra day at Christmas, or the ability to buy holiday days if that's important to someone, because as Vicky Knights was saying, the other challenge as a running an organisation is that often you'll find people, lots of different things are different for lots of different people, and you're thinking, oh God, I can't put in, you know, 15 different sort of solutions. So there may be issues like that. When we asked our team, and it's well stuff you don't think about, we asked our team what we might put in place, and they all agreed that once a month we would have a day where there were no internal meetings. And so we were like, oh, okay, didn't realise that was an issue, didn't even know that was a problem. And we put it in place, and we had to be a bit careful that wasn't always Friday, because people work part-time and a lot of people don't always work on a Friday, which again, you know, unintended consequences, the things you don't think about, but actually it's working quite well. So I think it's a question of putting things in place. Alex's idea of getting out at lunchtime, we have a August steps challenge where we put people in teams and see how many steps we can get over the course of the month. Turns out it's quite hard to get 15,000 steps in a day. I've never measured it before, but it was really great because it was in teams too. So we sort of were able to support each other to get to the 15,000 or however many we were trying to get to a day. So I think there are lots of things, you know, and employees I know also recognise that where we, you know, small organisations don't have HR departments and leaders are really trying to do their best, but you know, trying to put a variety in place will help.
And I think I'd echo that, Shevaun. I love those ideas about the number out of 10 or banning the word fine. I think that's like, that'd be brilliant. And I think as leaders, it's about sometimes showing your vulnerability too, as well, isn't it? To say, it's okay, I'm having a bad day too. And I think sometimes as leaders, we try and put on a brave face because we feel we have to, but I think our employees really appreciate it when they see some vulnerability from leaders to say, actually, I'm having a bad day, and actually, I'd love a day a month without any internal meetings. So I think it's just showing that human side as well around your own well-being as a leader is really, really important.
Yeah. And you know, people's hinterlands what are so different, like what each person's had to deal with before they even set foot in the office of a morning, you know, be it tiny small people, I haven't slept most of the night, or I had to get my teenagers to school, or the tube was horrible, or I couldn't get on the bus, or you know, all those different things depending on where you are in your stage of life, you know, impact you before you even set foot in the office or the shop or wherever your workplace is. So that's important to remember too, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Giving people the opportunity to just have a cup of tea in peace. It's perhaps all everybody wants in the morning to get them going. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we're now going to move on to some questions from the audience. So if you'd all like to type any of your questions into the chat, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. But one we've already had through. So how do you get managers/directors to buy into developing a more robust and audience appropriate wellbeing strategy? I find SMT want to keep people in the office doing the day-to-day job as much as possible.
I don't mind starting with this. Everyone will think, oh, you're really lucky because you work for a health and wellbeing organisation, so it must be like pushing open an open door. I still have the same issues with certain departments and certain managers around actually, oh, we're more productive if we're just, you know, strapped to the desk and we're working, you know, sending out emails all the time. So I'm not saying it's not easier for me being in a health and wellbeing organisation, but I think it's getting to know those people that you would find it more difficult with, and having that stakeholder management, stakeholder conversation that says, I need your help with this, or you know, you are the director, people are looking at you, you create a shadow as a manager, positive and negative, and I think it's giving that feedback to say you're creating a bit of a negative shadow by saying wellbeing is not important, and talk to them about their own wellbeing and how do they manage themselves. Everybody has well-being that they need to, you know, look after. I don't know if Alex and Shevaun have got any other things to add to that. I think,
yeah, I think you know, similarly, obviously, you know, we represent the fitness and leisure sector. A physical activity organisation doesn't necessarily mean all of us are really physically active, and we do have, you know, an excessive meeting culture as well sometimes. And I think that something just to add there, Vicky, is from my perspective is sort of bringing the senior management team kind of on the journey as well. So if maybe they have reservations around well-being, whatever that might be, it's probably not necessarily because they don't care about people's well-being. It's because maybe there's a fear or a scare that that's going to lead to losing something elsewhere. And so understanding kind of, I guess, their reservations and working with them on the kind of the education part that, you know, actually if you give a little bit of time here, then this brings back in other ways. I think that can be really valuable, because what people, you know, when people understand things better, it's less of a like changing behaviors is less of a big deal, or it seems less of a kind of monumentous thing. I'm not sure if Shevaun or Vicky would agree with that. But
yeah, I mean, taking people on that journey, and actually, you know, sometimes you might find it's because it just hasn't been put to them in a way that they sort of get. One of the things we find across the chamber network is peer-to-peer learning is hugely valuable. So if your SMT aren't getting it, maybe there are leaders in other organisations who can help them understand the benefits that they've seen in their organisation by putting some of these things in place.
Thank you. And then another question is, we are a disability confident employer and have staff with mobility issues. Which activities would you recommend for them so they are included?
We've done some great desk stretching. It's amazing now when you sat at a desk just around your wrists and shoulders. So it's not always about, I don't think, the step counting. It's just about that general mobility, and then being able to sort of release some pressures and stretching the muscles around that, and ask them how would they want to be more mobile. What is it that they would like to have more time to do? I think don't be afraid to ask the question.
Absolutely, I would totally agree with that. It definitely isn't always about the step count, and I think when it comes to making activities as inclusive as possible, we're not necessarily going to know all of the answers that might work for a particular kind of individual and their sort of abilities, whatever that might be. So asking is really important because they might have some kind of great ways that they know will work for them, and that could be something that works for other individuals in the organisation as well. But yeah, desk stretching is a great one, and even sort of anything that's kind of, there's loads of sort of different kind of videos and stuff out there. You could do little like kind of feet-based dancing and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily require you to go kind of out and running or anything.
We have a great thing we do, desk dancing. So on Friday afternoons, whoever fancies it volunteers to put together a Spotify playlist, themed Spotify playlist, and then everyone adds in their favourite tunes. So not only do you get to do a bit of desk dancing, but you also get to learn people's dubious taste in music, which is actually fascinating because you find out some quite interesting things you didn't know.
Love that. Love that.
Thank you. And Alex, as well, do you have any other recommendations for indoor activities that can be done now that the weather's getting a little bit colder?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And yeah, it does play into that point that with the weather getting colder, it's sort of even more important to look out for staff's kind of well-being, isn't it? So and aware that depending on if an individual is kind of working in an office or even working from home, that the space might be quite small. So again, I'd think referring to things like the desk-based stretching or kind of activities that could be done in a particular, in like a small location. So sometimes I've read and listened to different kind of ideas. I love reading kind of podcasts about these sorts of things, and some of the ideas people come up with are kind of like a challenge, like if you've gone to the kitchen or if you've gone to the and that might be in your office building as well, to kind of boil the kettle or to get a cup of tea. It's kind of holding a squat for that period of time while the kettle's boiling, and that in itself doesn't necessarily require you to be moving around a lot or having lots of space, but it does kind of get those muscles working. Could be kind of balancing on one leg if that's something that that works for you. You know, yoga is a great way of, and similar to stretching, it's a great way to sort of release tension and anxiety and stress as well. So I think it's really what you as an individual or individuals themselves enjoy doing. So a variety of different kind of ideas.
Thank you. And then we've had a question for Shevaun. So how can we improve the current level of negativity that staff are feeling due to the looming financial crisis and things that are out of our control? Understandably, people are down in mood and it's bad news every day currently.
Yeah, I know that's right. So interestingly, and I think this is a great reflection of the businesses of our nation, our data shows that although people do feel negative about the general economic conditions, they actually feel very positive about their own organisations. And when I travel the country to the chambers and to meet businesses around the place, they obviously do talk a lot about the issues they're facing, but they also talk a lot about what they're doing about it. So putting new things in place, trying different suppliers, you know, agile, entrepreneurial, there's a real sort of spirit there of can-do attitude. So it's maybe a bit of helping employees understand, you know, the positives of where the business is going and the upsides. Look, don't get me wrong, it's super hard at the moment, but and you've got to be realistic. So our chambers at the moment are putting together fact sheets and information, for example, for businesses there for their members on where they can find help and assistance for their employees. So it's definitely worth getting in touch with your local chamber on that. And I think it's just probably a question of, without being insensitive to what is going on, ensuring that you are telling the good stories of what is going on with the business and the local economy, as well as the challenging bits. Because the news, I mean, I can't say I've stopped watching the news because it's partly my job, but, you know, I do think people should think about limiting how much they do spend time listening to the news, because it's just the noise. It's really, really hard. So make sure that you're sending the positive messages about, you know, what you're seeing out there and how the business is going, to try and counteract a lot of that negativity that's out in the media.
Thank you. And then a question for Vicky. How can we positively influence our managers to focus on their team's wellbeing and care, whilst not stressing the managers who have a heavy task load to address, and help find that balance?
I think it is hard to find a balance sometimes, and I think similar to the question earlier around, you know, senior management teams not buying into it, I think it's the same. I think it's really taking the time with your managers to understand how they could fit wellbeing into the task. So it's not about having to choose one over the other. How can it work to do both in sort of in unison with each other and try to complement each other, and understanding and really trying to influence managers to understand that by taking sometimes a pause moment and an opportunity to down tools for a minute will give you so much more in the long run. And we see that, don't we, when you know, we ask people have asked for some time off work for something, and then you see them naturally wanting to either make up that time or wanting to give you that extra bit. Majority of employees will want to give that extra mile when you've given them something in return. So it is about a two-way street, really, for me. And managers themselves need to look after themselves. You know, the aeroplane analogy around putting your own mask on first before looking after other people, in terms of, you know, when oxygen goes, it's the same around wellbeing. You can't look after your team's wellbeing if you're not looking after your own first. So thinking about how they can pause and reflect themselves whilst balancing the task.
Thank you. And then a question for anyone who would like to answer it is, any suggestions on how to offer initiatives that work for both office and field-based employees as we struggle to include our remote workforce?
I'm happy to give an example of this. I think it's a really interesting question, and one that sort of came up quite a lot in our research. And again, it's something that with a hybrid workforce, we as an organisation are also sort of trying to find the balance of. I think the key there is offering, where possible, that option of flexibility. So everyone will have well-being needs that are different, and they might have, say, from a physical activity perspective, want to do completely different things, and so maybe having like a prescript sort of opportunity that, say, only works in an office environment is not going to necessarily support those in a remote environment. So it's allowing this is, I guess, where like the flexible working or that sort of flexibility is really helpful, because it allows employees to use the time in the way that works for them, whether they're from a remote environment or not. But it could be that there's, you know, a variety of options that work for both. So you were asking Ellie earlier about the kind of things that could be done inside, and you know, from a variety of sort of like home workout videos from a physical perspective, or different sort of well-being activities that might work from a kind of for more of a remote workforce, or something that they could tap into from a live stream. And perhaps in a more in-person setting, that remote sort of activity gets replaced by like the in-person activity, but there's an option for individuals remotely to sort of join that in some way if they can, perhaps through that sort of activity, that sort of challenge element, in whatever way that might be. So I think, again, it's about understanding what it is that the employees need and want in those sorts of environments, and not assuming that one thing is going to work for everyone, and that some people will just engage with some things more than other things, and it might be that some people really do want to kind of get outside, and they will come into the office to take part in an activity if, say, for example, something's being put on, and others might not. So having a variety of kind of options there, understanding what it is that employees want, it's probably the best way to start, instead of kind of prescripting a particular sort of initiative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And then final question that we've got time for today is, we're losing a lot of employees due to long hours and minimum pay. Do you have any suggestions on how to manage that?
Maybe I'll start. It's very super hard, and we're seeing it from a lot of our members, particularly SMEs who lose people to bigger organisations who can pay more. Really, it's about, I think, looking at the culture and benefits of the organisation. So it being the sort of organisation people want to work for, what other benefits can you put in place that aren't about pay, holidays, discounts. A number of our members across the country are this is extreme, but they're experimenting with a 4-day working week. They found some of them have found it to be, and those are both factory-based and office-based organisations, and they're seeing quite positive results. They're seeing all people coming back to work for them who've left to other organisations. But also, I think when you're thinking about long hours, a question might be, what do you need to stop doing as an organisation? Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So it's now time for our webinar to finish. So apologies if we didn't get around to your question, but thank you very much for sending those in. And thanks for everyone for taking the time to join, and for our panellists for sharing their expertise. So don't forget, you can download our big opportunity for SME report in the handouts section on your screen. We'd appreciate your feedback via the survey that will appear shortly, and you'll also receive an email with a link to the survey and the recording of the webinar. If you'd like to speak to one of our health and wellbeing consultants about supporting wellbeing in your organisation, please speak with your account manager if you have one, or you can contact us by email at businessinquiries@westfieldhealth.com. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.